The docking bay of Elora Prime buzzed an energy that seemed almost tangible, a low hum vibrating through the metallic floors and luminous walls. Humans had never set foot here before, and now their first delegation crossed the threshold like curious pilgrims entering a grand cathedral. Lieutenant Mira Solis led the small Earth party, her sharp green eyes flicking over the towering alien figures who lined the arrival hall. Velthrin guards stood in polished armor, twice the height of any human, their smooth blue skin and glittering insignias flashing under the sterile white lights. Around them, diplomats and spectators gathered, their elongated features twisted in poorly concealed amusement. Mira adjusted the strap of her simple white uniform, pretending not to hear the murmurs. Adorable, like miniature sculptures. So fragile. The words floated just out of reach, whispered behind long fingers and flicking tongues. Ambassador Turin, an older man with silver at his temples, kept a dignified expression. His smile was measured as he stepped forward to greet High Minister Velrix, who lowered his immense frame and offered a thin-lipped grin. The translator devices embedded behind every participant's ear crackled as Velrix spoke. "Welcome, honored guests, from the world called Earth. It is delightful to host such rare specimens." His voice oozed patronization, masked in diplomatic polish. Mira suppressed a twitch of annoyance. She had been briefed. The Velthrin elite viewed humanity as charming, non-threatening, even a little pitiful. It was a perception the Earth Alliance had reluctantly decided not to correct. Yet, Turin bowed with perfect grace. "We are grateful for your hospitality and eager to learn from your esteemed civilization." Mira remained silent, observing. Her orders were clear: watch, listen, report. It wasn't just a ceremonial visit. Whispers had already reached Earth about Velthrin interest in new labor forces. Mira had volunteered immediately for mission, her instincts prickling with unease. Being underestimated could be a weapon if wielded properly. The delegation was led through labyrinthine corridors of gleaming metal and soft light, past windows that overlooked the sprawling Star City. Elora Prime hung like a mechanical jewel against a backdrop of swirling nebulae, teeming with ships and species from across the quadrant. Every detail was designed to impress and to intimidate. Mira kept her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. Inside, she cataloged every strategic weakness: security posts, guard rotations, entry points. Old habits died hard. At the welcoming banquet, they were treated like amusing pets. Platters of alien delicacies were laid out, though most humans barely touched them. Velthrin dignitaries bent low to coo at the delegation's quaint customs, marveling at their primitive physiology. One particularly bloated minister leaned over Mira, his voice syrupy. "Tell me, little blossom, is it true your kind can survive unaided on open planets? How precious." Mira tilted her head slightly, her smile polite and empty. "It's true. We're remarkably resilient." He chuckled as if she'd told a joke. Around them, alien laughter rose and fell like waves, a low background noise of mockery. Later that evening, Mira found a moment to slip onto a balcony overlooking the city. She leaned on the cold rail, breathing in the recycled air, her braid brushing against her shoulder. "You handled that well." Turin's voice came from behind her. She turned. The ambassador joined her, his lined face weary but approving. "We need to endure this treatment a little longer," he said softly. "There's more going on here than hospitality." "I know," Mira replied. She tapped a small, almost invisible comm chip behind her ear. "Intel chatter's been spiking. Several factions see Earth not as an ally, but as acquisition potential." Turin's mouth tightened. "We have to be careful. One misstep and they'll either dismiss us completely, or worse, decide we're easier to control than we are." Mira smiled faintly. "Let them think we're harmless. It'll make it more satisfying when we prove otherwise." The next morning, the Earth delegation was escorted to a massive training arena deep within the station. It was an informal event, they were told, a friendly exhibition of strength and skill among species. Mira could practically hear the unspoken words, an opportunity to show off and quietly humiliate the newcomers. Spectators filled the tiered stands, a riot of colors and shapes. Scale beings, crystalline entities, creatures with feathered crests and slitted eyes. The air crackled with anticipation. Mira followed the others onto the polished floor, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes dissecting every movement. High Minister Velric stood on a raised platform, surrounded by advisors and armed guards. "It is our tradition," Velric announced, "to share demonstrations of physical prowess when greeting new allies. A celebration of strength and vitality." The translator softened his gloating tone, but Mira could hear it plainly. A massive Korthan warrior stepped forward first, lifting a weight that had to be several tons with ease. The crowd roared approval. Next, a slender winged female performed a dazzling aerial display, her body slicing through the air like a blade. When it was suggested that a human join, laughter rippled through the arena. Mira caught Trin's eye. He gave the barest nod. She stepped forward. Velric's lip curled in obvious amusement. "You little blossom? Surely you would not risk injury for mere spectacle." Mira shrugged, her posture lazy, almost bored. "Why not? It sounds like fun." An aide hurried to clear space, selecting a piece of equipment that looked comically oversized next to her slight frame, a tank-like vehicle used in ground assaults, its surface still scarred from previous battles. It rumbled forward, heavy and menacing. The crowd chuckled, murmuring in anticipation of the inevitable humiliation. Mira stretched lightly, her joints popping. She approached the tank, placed her hands against its armored plating, and without ceremony lifted. For a heartbeat, the arena fell utterly silent. The tank rose above Myra's head, her arms steady, her muscles barely trembling. Gasps rippled outward. Somewhere in the crowd, something heavy hit the ground with a thud. Someone fainting, perhaps. Mira held the tank aloft for a moment longer, letting the spectacle sear itself into memory of every onlooker, then carefully set back down with a dull clang. She dusted off her hands and turned back to the stunned High Minister. "That was fun," she said brightly. Velric's expression twisted, the mask of amused superiority cracking. His advisors whispered furiously behind him, their postures tense. Mira walked calmly back to her team, the noise of the arena growing from stunned silence into a rising, chaotic murmur. Trin's smile was faint but genuine as he whispered under his breath, "Congratulations, Lieutenant. You just declared Earth's arrival to the galaxy." Mira didn't respond immediately. She stood still, letting the weight of what she had done settle into the bones of the station itself. They had come here labeled as pets, as curiosities. That narrative was already beginning to unravel, and this was only the beginning. The ripples of Myra's feet spread through Velthora Prime like a shock wave through glass. Overnight, the human status transformed from amusing curiosities to potential threats. The sudden shift left unease in the air, visible in the stiffened postures of the Velthrin guards, in the wary glances cast from alien diplomats who once smiled so easily. Mira moved through the station with a new kind of attention drawn to her. Every step watched, every word weighed. She wore the scrutiny like armor, letting it slide off her without reaction. It wasn't fear she sensed. Not yet. It was a volatile mixture of curiosity, resentment, and a grudging, bitter respect. At a council reception later that evening, the atmosphere buzzed with strained politeness. Platters of exotic food went untouched. Conversations drifted away from harmless topics and edged toward veiled questions about Earth's unusual physiology. Mira sipped the alien equivalent of water, feeling the tension winding tighter around her. General Kavos, a hulking Velthrin military leader with a jagged scar running down one side of his face, broke from a huddle of other high-ranking officials and approached. His presence was impossible to ignore, both because of his sheer size and the barely concealed sneer on his lips. "You," he said, voice rumbling like distant thunder, "possess strength uncharacteristic for your species." Mira set her glass down carefully, meeting his gaze. Earth adapts to its challenges. A few nearby aliens chuckled humorlessly. Kavos folded his arms, the motion making his heavy armor plates groan. "Perhaps you would be willing to demonstrate again. In a more structured environment," he said. "We have facilities that test strength, speed, endurance. It will be enlightening." It was a challenge thinly veiled as diplomacy. Mira recognized it for what it was, A provocation meant to test the limits of what humanity could really do, a test likely designed for her to fail. She saw the glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes, the anticipation of putting her back in her place. Mira glanced at Ambassador Turin. His expression gave nothing away, but the smallest nod at the corner of his mouth told her what she already knew. Accepting was inevitable. "I'd be honored," she said, voice smooth. By the next cycle, the arena had been refitted for a more serious demonstration. The stands filled again, but this time the energy was different. Coiled and hungry, like predators waiting for the first drop of blood. Word of the human strength had spread beyond the Veltherans. Now envoys from other species crowded the terraces, eager to see whether the rumors were exaggerations or terrifying truths. Mira stepped onto the arena floor, wearing a simple tactical uniform designed for mobility. No enhancements, no visible weapons. She didn't need them. Cavo stood on a raised platform, a slow, predatory smile stretching across his face. "For the record," he announced, voice amplified, "this is a voluntary demonstration, requested by the Earth representative." The translation devices caught the mocking emphasis. Mira smiled lightly, refusing to rise to the bait. The first test was straightforward, a pressure endurance trial. Massive weighted cylinders were lowered onto her shoulders, each one progressively heavier. Mira bore them easily, her posture barely shifting. She could feel the disbelief thickening around her with each added ton. When it became clear she would not buckle, the trial moved to agility. A gauntlet of shifting walls, energy pulses, and moving obstacles unfolded across the arena. Cavo's design, no doubt, something that would crush a normal creature foolish enough to enter. Mira watched the labyrinth reconfigure itself, tracking patterns, calculating timing. When the signal flared green, she moved. To the spectators, it must have looked almost unreal, a human form weaving between mechanical death traps, flipping over energy blades, sliding under collapsing pillars without hesitation. Each movement was clean, economical, efficient. Mira knew how to navigate threats. Earth had taught her that long before Velthora had. She completed the course in a fraction of the expected time. The final obstacle was a multi-ton slab meant to seal the exit. Without slowing, she caught it mid-fall, muscles locking, and shoved it aside with a snarl of effort. When she stepped into the open again, the arena was dead silent. On the platform, Cavo's smile had curdled into something uglier. Mira walked to the center of the field and looked up at him. "Is there another test?" Cavo's fist clenched. There was a beat of hesitation. Then a heavy rumble echoed through the far gates. A battle unit rolled forward, a Velthran assault tank, but this time it was fully armed, its weapon systems active, its shields humming. Gasps rippled through the audience. This wasn't a test. It was a confrontation. The tank's gun swiveled, locking onto Myra's position. She saw the flicker of movement on Cavo's wrist. A signal. Orders. Mira exhaled once, a calm breath that centered her. Before the tank could fire, she moved. She sprinted straight at it, dodging the first clumsy pulse shot with an easy sidestep. The second shot grazed the ground behind her, searing the arena floor. She closed the distance in seconds, momentum building. Planting one foot on the tank's reinforced plating, she vaulted onto its chassis. The machine tried to react, swiveling wildly, but she was already moving, scaling its surface. Reaching the main turret, she gripped the barrel and wrenched. Metal screamed. With a final pull, Mira ripped the turret free, tossing it aside like a broken toy. The tank shuddered, system short-circuiting under the sudden damage. Sparks sprayed from shattered panels. Mira dropped to ground as the machine sputtered to a halt. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a roaring cacophony of disbelief, awe, and fear. Guards rushed forward, forming a loose ring around Mira. She stood still, unthreatening, hands relaxed at her sides. But her eyes spoke louder than any threat. Cavo's descended the platform slowly, his massive frame rigid with fury. He stopped a few meters away, breathing heavily, face twisted into something between hatred and reluctant admiration. "It seems," he said, voice low, "we have underestimated you." Mira offered a faint smile. "It happens." Behind her, Turin approached, The ambassador's diplomatic mask still in place, but there was a gleam in his eyes that hadn't been there before. They had made their point. Earth was no one's pet, no one's trophy, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that. The Velthrin Council convened under veils of secrecy, their meetings hidden behind thick walls and thicker lies. From a human's vantage point, locked out of every critical discussion, it was clear the tide was turning against them faster than Turin had predicted. Mira knew the signs of a closing noose. The sudden changes in their escorts, larger, quieter, more heavily armed. The polite but clipped messages from council aides, rescheduling talks with no intention of ever resuming them. The shift in the station's atmosphere. Less curious stares now, more hard, measuring looks. The night after Myra's clandestine meeting in the tunnels, she gathered the Earth delegation in the briefing room, its walls humming with the low thrum of surveillance dampeners. Turin stood at the head of the table, grim, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the surface. The Velthrins are accelerating their plans, Mira said, dropping the decrypted contents of the stolen data chip onto projection display. Lines of text scrolled rapidly, orders, schedules, contingency blueprints. In 72 hours, they'll detain us under the pretext of quarantine violations. The real plan is to separate us, interrogate us, dissect us. There was a moment of silence, heavy as lead. We cannot allow that, Turin said finally, voice cold. Mira leaned in, the edge of battle sharpening her features. We won't, but we have to move before they do. The plan was simple, because complexity was death when betrayal closed in from all sides. They would disappear from their quarters, vanish into the underbelly of Elora Prime, and link up with a handful of allies Mira and Turin had quietly cultivated. With their help, they would slip off station before the council could act. Simple plans Mira knew were the hardest to ruin. The first phase came at midnight station time. Mira led the team through service corridors used by maintenance drones and forgotten by the station's watchful eyes. She moved like water, silent and unstoppable, guiding her people through a labyrinth of steel veins. Twice they came across patrols. Twice they melted into alcoves and watched squads of Velthrin soldiers stomp past, sensors sweeping empty air where humans had been moments before. At the freight docks, Sovereign awaited them, cloaked in civilian garb that did little to hide his reptilian form. His trade ship loomed behind him, engines idling, ready for an unsanctioned launch. You're late, Sovereign hissed, glancing around nervously. You're early, Mira countered, scanning the docking bay. No alarms yet. No sudden movement from the control towers. Maybe they would actually pull this off without blood. Then the first shot rang out, slicing the silence into chaos. Mira shoved Sovereign back behind a shipping container as a barrage of pulse fire peppered the bay. Velthrin soldiers flooded from hidden corridors, weapons gleaming under the harsh lights. Their faces were blank behind their helmets, executing orders without hesitation. Turin ducked low beside her, cursing under his breath. It was a setup. No, Mira snarled, drawing her sidearm and firing back with sharp, clinical precision. It was an inevitability. She covered the delegation's retreat towards Sovereign's ship, movements honed to lethal economy. Every shot counted. Every step was measured. Behind her, Sovereign's mercenaries fought with less discipline but desperate energy, exchanging fire with Velthrin troopers at choke points. Explosions rocked the dock, filling the air with smoke and the metallic taste of ozone. Mira pivoted behind the crate, changing clips with fluid motion. Her mind raced, not with fear, but with calculations. Sovereign's ship could lift off if they reached it. The Velthrins hadn't deployed heavy armor yet. They were trying to capture, not annihilate. Still salvageable. A Velthrin soldier broke cover, sprinting toward the delegation with a stun pike crackling in his hands. Mira didn't hesitate. She intercepted him mid-stride, grabbing the shaft of the weapon, twisting his momentum against him, and hurling him into a wall with bone-crunching force. Around her, Earth's delegation moved better than she could have hoped. Turin provided covering fire, crisp and unhesitating. Arlen, the team's engineer, overloaded a nearby service panel, frying half a squad shield in a shower of sparks. Even the younger delegates held their ground, fear sharpened into defiant survival. They reached the boarding ramp together, a battered, breathless cluster. Sovereign slapped the control panel, and the ramp began to rise. A second squad of Velthrin troops sprinted into view, weapons raised, just as the ship's outer guns swiveled into position. Myra's heart hammered in her chest as she threw herself across the narrowing gap, dragging Arlen by the collar when he stumbled. Pulse shots sizzled past her, one grazing her shoulder and burning a line of fire through her uniform. She gritted her teeth and didn't slow. The ramp sealed with a heavy thud behind them. Inside, Sovereign barked orders to his crew in a rapid, harsh tongue. The ship lurched under them, engines howling as it strained against emergency lockdown protocols trying to anchor it. Mira staggered to the viewport and watched Velthrin security skimmers streak toward them, sirens wailing. "Faster!" she growled. The ship bucked hard, then surged forward, breaking free. Below, the docks receded, flashing with the lights of 100 alarms. Mira leaned her forehead briefly against the cool glass, letting herself feel the relief for a single heartbeat. Then she turned back to the others. "We're not safe yet," she said, voice steady. Turin nodded grimly. "Where to?" Sovereign, slumping into a pilot chair, flicked several switches. "I have contacts beyond the local sector, places even the Velthrins hesitate to touch. We lay low, build strength, then choose our battlefield." Mira smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Good," she said, "because next time we choose when the fight happens." She caught Turin's eye, and in that glance was the unspoken truth they both understood. They had escaped the trap. For now. But war was coming, and this time, Earth would not wait for permission. Sovereign's ship, the Veil Fortune, was fast, but not invisible. Within hours of breaking free from Velthora Prime's orbit, it became clear they were being hunted. Every jump to a new system brought a new wave of encrypted alerts and sightings of Velthrin strike craft combing the region, their search patterns methodical and merciless. In the command chamber, Mira stood over the navigation console, her fingers tracing routes through the chaotic weave of nearby sectors. Every pathway was narrowing. Every safe haven was becoming a trap. Turin entered silently, a datapad in his hand. His expression was carved from stone. "They're offering bounties now," he said, tossing the pad onto the console. Mira scanned the projection. Images of Earth's delegation flickered in the air, grainy and distorted but recognizable. The Velthrins weren't bothering with subtlety anymore. They wanted to make an example out of them, to reassert their dominance over a galaxy that had glimpsed, for the first time in centuries, the possibility of change. "We need to strike back," Mira said, voice low and hard. "Not run." Turin nodded slowly, but not recklessly. "They expect us to keep fleeing, to scatter and die out. They won't expect us to go after them." A plan was taking shape between them, silent and inevitable. The rest of the delegation gathered in the ship's cramped mess hall. Sovereign stood in the corner, arms crossed, silent but attentive. He knew better than to question the humans now. He had seen enough to recognize that their survival instincts weren't rooted in fear, but in a dangerous, burning defiance. Mira laid it out clearly. "We strike a council armory," she said. "Not to destroy it. To steal." There was a murmur of disbelief. Arlen, bruised and bandaged from the dock-fight, leaned forward. "Steal what?" he asked. Myra's eyes glittered. "Proof. Technology the Council has been hiding for decades. Evidence of experiments, forbidden weapons. The kind of truth that can topple regimes." Turin picked up the thread seamlessly. "We leak it to every independent power, every rival faction, every citizen who ever resented Velthrin rule. We start a fire they can't smother. Risky, audacious, suicidal, perhaps, perfect." Sovereign reluctantly provided the necessary intelligence. He knew of a black site storage facility hidden in the orbit of a gas giant, shielded from casual detection. Light defenses, heavy secrecy. They spent a tense day preparing. Mira fine-tuned their stolen weapons, adapting Velthrin tech to human reflexes. Turin and Sovereign mapped insertion points and exfiltration routes. Every member of the team rehearsed the approach until their movements became second nature. When they finally launched, the Veil Fortune was a ghost in the starless dark. The facility floated above the roiling storms of the gas giant, like a spider suspended over a chasm. No welcoming beacons, no official registry, just a cluster of hardened modules stitched together with gunmetal scaffolding. They approached on silent thrusters, using the planet's magnetic turbulence to mask their vector. Mira led the boarding party, her heart a steady drumbeat in her ears. Docking was rough. The facility's defenses detected them at the last moment, unleashing a web of automated turrets. Mira hit the airlock controls as Arlen jammed the enemy sensors, flooding them with phantom signatures. Inside, the corridors were narrow, metallic, and pulsing with red emergency lights. Velthran guards scrambled to respond, but Mira and her team moved with brutal precision, disabling and disarming without hesitation. They reached the core vault within minutes. Massive, armored doors barred the way, reinforced with biometric locks and rotating encryption cycles. Arlen worked feverishly, hands a blur over his tools. 2 minutes, he gasped. Mira turned to cover him just as a squad of Velthran Marines rounded the corner. She moved without thought. A shot dropped the point man. Another volley forced the rest into cover. Mira advanced in a lethal dance, every step minimizing her exposure, every pull the trigger another promise kept. Turin joined her side, rifle kicking against his shoulder as he laid down suppressive fire. They fought not for domination or conquest, but for the right to survive, for the right to be seen. The vault door yawned open. Inside were shelves stacked with forbidden tech, plasma weapon prototypes, experimental armor rigs, data cores containing decades of black research. Mira and Arlen moved swiftly, extracting data units and scanning labels. They didn't need everything, only the right pieces. They found it tucked behind a stack of inactive drone parts, a small, unassuming data crystal marked with a sigil of absolute secrecy. Arlen scanned it and whistled low. This is it. Genetic experimentation records, directed energy weapon blueprints, illegal AI development. Prove Elora had been violating every galactic treaty it enforced on others. Mira slipped the crystal into a sealed case. Move, she barked. They fell back under heavy fire, Sovereign coordinating their exfiltration through an encrypted comms link. Explosions ripped through side corridors as Sovereign's people deployed remote charges to cover the retreat. The boarding ramp slammed shut behind them, just as the Veiled Fortune punched free from the facility's docking clamps. Pursuit ships scrambled to intercept, but Sovereign pushed the engines to the edge of critical failure, riding shock waves and gravitational eddies to slingshot them into deep space. For a long moment, silence filled the ship, broken only by the creaking of stressed metal and the distant whine of cooling systems. Then Mira stood, battered unbowed, and carried the case to the central console. Turin activated the transmission protocols. One by one, encrypted packets of truth shot out into the void, beacons carrying their payloads to sympathetic contacts, independent media hubs, shadow networks that thrived on scandal. The effect was immediate. Velthran space lit up with protests, riots, defections. Independent systems that had lived under the Council's thumb for centuries began openly declaring secession. Allied fleets maneuvered to threatening positions under the pretext of joint exercises. Mira watched it all unfold from the viewport, the stars shifting subtly as the ship adjusted course. Turin approached quietly, standing beside her. "We changed something today," he said. Mira nodded, eyes never leaving the blackness beyond. "We broke the myth," she said. "They're not invincible." Turin was silent a moment. Then he asked, almost casually, "What now?" Myra's smile was slow, fierce. "Now," she said. "Now we teach them what happens when you underestimate the cute ones." Beyond the glass, the galaxy seemed to shudder. Old empires cracking, new possibilities taking root. Earth was no longer a backwater. They were no longer the joke whispered among council elites. They were a storm rising, and they were just getting started.